When my husband David insisted on hiring Jessica Martinez as our new employee relations manager without my input, I thought I was witnessing poor judgment about workplace boundaries. When she arrived with state-of-the-art recording equipment and began systematically documenting every conversation I had with our staff, I realized I was facing something far more sinister. What this calculating woman and my supposedly devoted husband didn't know was that I had spent years building legal firewalls into our company structure, protections that would ultimately expose their shocking conspiracy to steal the business. I had built from nothing and destroy my reputation in the process. Sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those who sleep beside you at night and smile at you each morning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind rattled the windows of my corner office at Thomson Marketing Solutions as I reviewed the quarterly reports that confirmed what I already knew. Our little company had grown beyond my wildest dreams. What started 12 years ago as a desperate attempt to pay our mortgage after David lost his corporate job had evolved into one of Columbus, Ohio's most respected digital marketing agencies. 47 employees, 7-figure annual revenue, and a client roster that included some of the region's most prestigious medical practices and healthcare systems. I'm Lisa Thompson, and every success we've achieved came through sacrifice, intuition, and the kind of relentless dedication that turns abstract dreams into concrete reality. While other entrepreneurs talked about work-life balance, I was learning web design at midnight after working my day job. While others networked at industry events, I was cold calling medical practices and explaining why their outdated websites were costing them patients. The bags under my eyes and the gray threads appearing in my brown hair told the story of building something meaningful from absolutely nothing. Our Columbus headquarters occupied 2 floors of a renovated brick building in the Short North District, the kind of space that looked effortlessly stylish, but had required months of negotiation to secure and renovate within our budget. The exposed brick walls were lined with awards from marketing associations, framed testimonials from grateful clients, and photographs from company retreats that captured our team's genuine camaraderie. This wasn't just an office. It was the physical manifestation of everything I had sacrificed to create. David had joined Thomson Marketing Solutions 5 years earlier, after his second corporate downsizing left him unemployed, and our marriage strained by financial pressure. His MBA from Ohio State and experience in operations management made him a valuable addition to our growing team, handling the administrative complexities that had begun overwhelming my creative focus. While I concentrated on client relationships, campaign development, and the strategic vision that drove our growth, David managed internal operations, human resources functions, and the increasingly sophisticated systems required to support 47 employees. Our professional partnership had seemed like the perfect solution to both our business needs and marriage challenges. I could focus on the revenue-generating activities that energized me, while David applied his corporate expertise to create efficient operational systems. The division of responsibilities felt natural and complementary, allowing each of us to contribute our strongest skills to our shared success. The personal dynamic had been more complicated. David's corporate background came with expectations about hierarchy and authority that sometimes clashed with my entrepreneurial approach to leadership. He occasionally expressed frustration with what he called my hands-on management style, and suggested that my direct involvement in day-to-day operations might be hindering our company's professional development. These conversations always left me feeling defensive and confused. The personal attention I gave to client relationships and employee development had been fundamental to our success, yet David seemed to view these qualities as problems to be solved rather than assets to be leveraged. We had structured the company ownership to reflect our respective contributions and protect both our interests. As founder and primary business developer, I retained 75% ownership, while David held 25% for his operational management role. The arrangement had been formalized through carefully drafted agreements that protected both our investment and our ability to make strategic decisions about the company's future direction. Our marriage had stabilized somewhat as the business prospered, though certain tensions remained unresolved. David sometimes seemed resentful of the recognition I received as the company's founder and public face, making comments about how success had gone to my head, or how I had become difficult to work with as our responsibilities had expanded. These criticisms stung because they contradicted everything I believed about collaborative leadership and genuine care for both our employees and our clients. The warning signs had been subtle but persistent. David had begun questioning my decisions, more frequently in staff meetings, suggesting alternative approaches that emphasized efficiency over the relationship-building strategies that had always driven our growth. He talked increasingly about professionalizing our operations and implementing industry-standard management practices that would reduce what he termed my excessive involvement in routine business functions. Recent months had brought new pressures as our success created operational complexities that stretched our existing systems. Managing 47 employees required sophisticated human resources infrastructure that went far beyond David's other responsibilities. We needed someone dedicated to personnel issues, benefits administration, compliance requirements, and the increasingly intricate workplace policies necessary for a company our size. We had discussed hiring an employee relations manager throughout the summer, agreeing that this addition would relieve pressure on David while ensuring our growing team received appropriate professional support. I had envisioned a collaborative hiring process where we would interview candidates together, ensuring any new hire understood both our company culture and our shared vision for continued growth. That's why David's announcement in late September caught me completely off guard. He waited until our usual Monday morning strategy meeting, after we had reviewed client reports and upcoming project deadlines, to mention almost casually that he had identified the perfect candidate for our HR position. "I've found someone exceptional for the employee relations manager role," he said, not looking up from his laptop screen as he spoke. "Jessica Martinez has extensive human resources experience and excellent references from her previous positions. She's available to start immediately." Something in his tone made me pause in my review of the quarterly budget reports. David's voice carried an unusual tension, as if he were delivering rehearsed information rather than sharing exciting news about a promising candidate. His body language seemed equally off, shoulders slightly hunched, and eyes focused anywhere except my face. "Where did you meet her?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, I asked, noting how his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at the question. "Industry networking event last month," he replied quickly, still avoiding direct eye contact. "She was presenting on modern HR methodologies and organizational development strategies. Really impressive background and immediately available." The explanation felt scripted, lacking the natural enthusiasm David typically showed when discussing promising new hires. His usual collaborative approach to significant staffing decisions had been replaced by something that felt more like a fait accompli than a mutual discussion. "I'd like to interview her before we make any formal offers," I said, falling back on our established protocol for hiring key personnel. David's expression shifted slightly, revealing a flash of irritation before he composed himself. "Actually, I was hoping we could streamline the process this time. Jessica is fielding multiple offers from other companies, and if we want someone of her caliber, we need to move decisively." This departure from our normal hiring practices raised immediate concerns. We had always interviewed important candidates together, particularly for positions involving access to sensitive employee information and company financial data. David's sudden urgency about bypassing our collaborative approach felt completely inconsistent with his usual methodical decision-making style. "David, this person will have access to payroll information, employee records, and confidential personnel data," I pointed out. "Don't you think we should both meet her before committing to an offer?" His response revealed more irritation than the situation seemed to warrant. "Lisa, sometimes you need to trust other people's judgment instead of insisting on controlling every aspect of every decision. I'm perfectly capable of evaluating HR candidates without your direct supervision." The harsh edge in his voice was unlike anything I had heard from him in professional contexts. David's criticism implied that my desire to meet important new hires represented some form of pathological control rather than reasonable business prudence. Despite my growing unease, I recognized that our HR needs were becoming critical business, issues that couldn't wait indefinitely for perfect circumstances. Our existing systems were inadequate for a company our size, and David was clearly feeling overwhelmed by the administrative responsibilities that had expanded far beyond his original role. "If you're confident in her qualifications," I said, carefully, "I'll support your decision. But I want to meet her during her first week and review her progress closely during the initial probationary period." David's relief was immediate and obvious, suggesting that my agreement had removed some significant source of stress or pressure. "Absolutely," he said, his tone returning to something approaching normal. "You'll be impressed with her professional approach once you see how efficiently she handles employee relations issues." His phrasing struck me as oddly specific. Most new employees required weeks or months to demonstrate their capabilities, yet David seemed confident that Jessica would immediately impress me with her efficiency. The certainty suggested a level of familiarity that went beyond a single networking event encounter. That afternoon, I found myself unable to concentrate fully on client work as nagging doubts about the hiring decision continued surfacing. My instincts had been honed through 12 years of reading people and situations, skills that had been essential to building successful client relationships and managing a growing team. Something about David's presentation of Jessica Martinez felt fundamentally dishonest, though I couldn't identify specific deceptions in his explanation. Rather than ignore these concerns, I decided to take proactive steps to protect both our business interests and my peace of mind. I called Patricia Wells, the attorney who had helped structure our business entity and draft our employment agreements over the years. "Patricia, I need to review our current employment contracts and administrative access protocols," I explained during our phone conversation. "We're bringing on a new HR manager, and I want to ensure our proprietary information and client data remain appropriately protected." Patricia's legal expertise had guided us through various business challenges, from contract disputes with vendors to complex client negotiations. Her approach always emphasized prevention over reaction, building protective systems before problems emerged rather than scrambling to address crises after they developed. "Smart thinking, Lisa," she replied. "Let me review your existing agreements and suggest some updates that would strengthen your protections. It's always better to have safeguards you don't need than to need safeguards you don't have." Her recommendations included implementing staged access levels for new employees, requiring dual authorization for accessing sensitive payroll and personnel records, and establishing clear documentation requirements for any major personnel decisions or policy changes. She also suggested updating our confidentiality agreements to address modern workplace issues like electronic surveillance and social media policies. "Given the sensitive nature of HR work," Patricia added, "I'd also recommend including specific clauses about unauthorized recording or documentation of workplace conversations. Privacy laws in Ohio are quite strict about consent requirements for recording." At the time, her suggestion about recording restrictions seemed like standard legal caution rather than prescient wisdom. I agreed to all her recommendations, viewing them as reasonable protections for a growing business rather than defenses against specific threats. Patricia scheduled a meeting for the following week to finalize the updated agreements and implement the new access controls. Her thoroughness had always impressed me, and I felt confident that whatever challenges Jessica's employment might bring, we would be legally prepared to handle them appropriately. The weekend passed uneventfully, though I noticed David seemed unusually preoccupied with his phone, responding to text messages with an urgency that seemed inconsistent with typical weekend communications. When I asked about the messages, he explained that he was coordinating Jessica's start date and ensuring all necessary paperwork would be ready for her first day. His explanation was reasonable, but something about his secrecy around the communications felt disproportionate to routine onboarding logistics. David had never been particularly private about work-related phone calls or emails, often sharing amusing client stories or frustrating vendor issues. His sudden discretion about Jessica-related communications struck me as another small inconsistency in a growing pattern of unusual behavior. Monday morning arrived with the crisp autumn air that made Columbus especially beautiful. I arrived at the office early, as was my habit, planning to review client reports and prepare for the week's strategic priorities. Our building was quiet at 7:30 in the morning, with most employees arriving closer to 9 o'clock for our flexible start times. Walking through our reception area toward my corner office, I was surprised to see lights already on in the administrative wing where David's office was located. Through the glass partition, I could see two figures in intense discussion over what appeared to be employee files and organizational charts. David was there, as expected, but seated across from him was a woman I didn't recognize. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with shoulder-length brown hair and professional attire that suggested careful attention to workplace appearance. Her posture conveyed confidence and engagement as she leaned forward, pointing to specific documents, while speaking in animated but quiet tones. This had to be Jessica Martinez, apparently starting her first day with an early morning strategy session, rather than the typical new employee orientation I had planned. The sight of her already deep in discussion about what looked like sensitive company information triggered my protective instincts about proprietary data and employee privacy. I approached their workspace with coffee and what I hoped was a welcoming smile, despite my growing concerns about the unusual circumstances surrounding Jessica's hiring and immediate integration into our operations. "Good morning," I said, pausing at the entrance to David's office. "You must be Jessica. I'm Lisa Thompson." Jessica looked up with a bright professional smile that seemed perfectly calibrated for making positive first impressions. Her eye contact was direct and confident, suggesting someone comfortable with authority figures and professional interactions. "Mrs. Thompson," she replied, rising from her chair with appropriate deference. "David has told me so much about you and the incredible company you've built here. I'm genuinely excited to contribute to your continued success and help optimize your human resources operations." Her enthusiasm appeared authentic, but I noticed that her immediate response was to reference David's descriptions of me rather than acknowledging our company's reputation or her own qualifications. Most senior-level new hires naturally emphasized their own background and expertise during initial introductions, using first meetings to establish their credibility and professional value. "I was hoping we could schedule some time this morning to discuss your background and how you envision this role developing," I suggested, maintaining my welcoming tone while asserting the collaborative approach I preferred for key personnel. Jessica glanced quickly at David before responding, a micro-expression that suggested checking for approval or guidance rather than considering my request independently. "Of course, David and I were just reviewing your current HR systems and identifying priority areas for immediate improvement. There are quite a few organizational development opportunities that could significantly benefit the company's operational efficiency." Her phrasing struck me as presumptuous for someone who had been in our building for less than an hour. The confidence with which she discussed improvement opportunities and organizational development suggested she had already formed comprehensive opinions about our operations without meeting our employees or understanding our company culture. "What specific areas have you identified as priorities?" I asked, genuinely curious about her assessment methodology and the basis for her rapid conclusions. David interjected before Jessica could respond. We've been discussing workflow optimization and communication efficiency improvements. Jessica brings extensive experience with organizational restructuring that could help us scale more effectively. His intervention felt protective of Jessica rather than collaborative with me. Another subtle shift in David's usual approach to workplace discussions. Normally, he encouraged new employees to speak for themselves during their interactions with company leadership, viewing independent communication as evidence of professional confidence and competence. The dynamic between David and Jessica felt unusually comfortable for people who had supposedly met only once at a networking event. Their body language suggested familiarity and shared understanding that went beyond typical professional relationships, even accounting for extensive interview, conversations, or pre-employment discussions. Despite these observations, I maintained my professional demeanor and expressed appropriate enthusiasm for Jessica's contributions to our team. First-day impressions could be misleading, and I wanted to give both Jessica and David the benefit of the doubt while remaining attentive to any genuine concerns about our company's interests. I'm looking forward to learning more about your experience and discussing how we can best support your success here, I told Jessica sincerely. Why don't we plan to meet this afternoon after you've had a chance to review our current systems and meet some of our key staff members? Jessica's smile remained professionally bright, but something in her eyes suggested calculation rather than simple appreciation. That sounds perfect, Mrs. Thompson. I'm sure we'll have a very productive working relationship. As I walked to my own office, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something more significant than a routine new employee introduction. The interaction had felt like a carefully choreographed performance rather than an authentic first meeting between colleagues. The morning proceeded with typical client calls and project reviews, but I found myself periodically glancing toward the administrative wing where Jessica was supposedly getting oriented to her new role. Through the glass partitions that separated our offices, I could see her moving between different workstations, apparently conducting informal meetings with various employees. By lunchtime, Jessica had managed to have conversations with nearly a third of our staff, an unusually extensive first-day interaction pattern that suggested either exceptional social skills or a systematic approach to gathering information about our workplace dynamics. Several employees mentioned their meetings with Jessica during routine check-ins throughout the morning. The feedback was consistently positive but strangely uniform, as if Jessica had used similar talking points and questions with each person she encountered. "The new HR person seems really thorough," commented Sarah Chen, one of our senior account managers. She asked a lot of detailed questions about our current management structure and communication processes. "She definitely seems experienced," agreed Marcus Williams, our head of graphic design. "Very professional questions about workplace satisfaction and organizational efficiency. Sounds like she's planning some comprehensive improvements to our systems." The similarity in their descriptions struck me as notable. Most new employees spent their first days learning about company procedures, understanding their specific responsibilities, and gradually building relationships with colleagues. Jessica's immediate focus on evaluating existing systems and soliciting feedback about management approaches seemed more consistent with an external consultant than an employee beginning a new position. My unease was growing, but I couldn't identify specific problems with Jessica's behavior that warranted immediate concern. Thoroughness and professionalism were positive qualities in an HR manager, and systematic assessment of existing operations was a reasonable approach for someone tasked with improving our human resources functions. Nevertheless, my instincts continued signaling that something about Jessica's presence in our office felt fundamentally wrong, despite the absence of obvious red flags or inappropriate behavior. 12 years of building successful business relationships had taught me to trust these intuitive warnings, even when I couldn't articulate logical reasons for my concerns. The afternoon brought our planned meeting, which would provide an opportunity to better understand Jessica's background and assess whether my morning reservations were justified or simply the result of natural resistance to change in our established Workplace dynamics. That afternoon meeting with Jessica would prove to be one of the most unsettling professional conversations of my career. She arrived at my office precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the same calculated smile that had marked our morning introduction. Her posture conveyed confidence bordering on presumption, as if she were conducting an interview rather than participating in one. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me today, Mrs. Thompson," Jessica began, settling into the chair across from my desk with practiced ease. "I've spent the morning conducting preliminary assessments of your current HR infrastructure, and I'm excited to share some initial observations." The immediate shift to presenting her findings rather than discussing her background struck me as professionally aggressive. Most new employees, particularly in senior positions, used initial meetings with company leadership to establish their credentials and understand organizational expectations before offering extensive recommendations. "I'd love to hear your thoughts," I replied carefully. "But first, I'm curious about your experience with companies similar to ours. David mentioned you have extensive HR background, but I'd like to understand more about your specific expertise." Jessica's smile flickered almost imperceptibly before brightening again. "Of course! I've worked with several mid-sized professional services firms, focusing on organizational optimization and workforce efficiency improvements. My specialization is identifying systemic communication issues and implementing data-driven solutions to enhance operational effectiveness." Her response was polished but curiously vague, filled with corporate buzzwords that conveyed expertise without providing concrete details about her actual experience or achievements. When I pressed for specifics about her previous positions, company names, or measurable results from her optimization work, Jessica deflected with general statements about confidentiality agreements and proprietary methodologies. "In my experience," she continued, smoothly steering the conversation back to her morning observations, "companies at your stage of growth often struggle with leadership transition challenges. Founders who have been hands-on from the beginning sometimes have difficulty adapting their management style to accommodate larger organizational structures." The implication that my leadership approach was somehow inappropriate for our current size hit like a calculated insult disguised as professional assessment. Jessica had been in our building for 5 hours and was already suggesting that my management style represented a problem requiring correction. "What specific leadership challenges have you observed?" I asked, maintaining my professional tone, despite growing irritation. Jessica opened her portfolio and consulted what appeared to be detailed notes from her morning employee conversations. Several staff members mentioned feeling micromanaged and expressed concerns about inefficient communication channels. There seems to be confusion about decision-making authority and some frustration with overlapping responsibilities between you and David. The systematic nature of her data gathering became clear as she referenced specific comments and concerns that could only have been collected through deliberate questioning, designed to elicit criticisms of current management. Her morning conversations hadn't been casual introductory chats, but strategic intelligence gathering sessions. Did employees volunteer these concerns, or were they responding to specific questions about management issues? I asked pointedly. Jessica's professional composure wavered slightly. "I always begin organizational assessments by gathering baseline feedback about current operational dynamics. It's standard practice to ask about communication effectiveness and management satisfaction levels." The admission that she had been conducting formal organizational assessments on her first day, without authorization or even informal discussion about such activities, confirmed my growing suspicions about her true agenda. HR managers typically spent weeks or months learning about company culture before attempting comprehensive evaluations of existing systems. "Jessica, I need to clarify something important," I said, leaning forward slightly to emphasize the seriousness of my concern. "You were hired as an employee relations manager to handle routine HR functions like benefits administration and workplace policy compliance. Conducting organizational assessments and making recommendations about leadership effectiveness falls well outside that scope of responsibility. Her reaction revealed more about her true intentions than any of her previous responses. Instead of apologizing for overstepping boundaries or acknowledging the inappropriate nature of her activities, Jessica's expression hardened with barely concealed frustration. Mrs. Thompson, with respect, effective HR management requires comprehensive understanding of organizational dynamics and leadership effectiveness. I can't properly address employee relations issues without evaluating the systemic factors that create those issues in the first place. The condescending tone and implicit criticism of my understanding of HR functions was breathtaking in its audacity. Jessica was essentially arguing that my objection to unauthorized organizational assessment demonstrated my inadequate grasp of modern human resources management. Furthermore, she continued, apparently deciding to abandon all pretense of deference, several employees expressed relief that someone was finally asking about these concerns. It suggests there may have been communication barriers that prevented them from sharing feedback through traditional channels. The implication that employees had been suffering in silence due to my poor leadership, and that Jessica's arrival represented some form of liberation, was both professionally insulting and strategically calculated. She was positioning herself as the solution to problems she claimed to have discovered through a few hours of leading questions. Our conversation continued for another 30 minutes, during which Jessica presented increasingly detailed recommendations for restructuring our management approach, implementing new communication protocols, and establishing formal feedback systems that would require significant changes to our existing operational structure. Her suggestions consistently emphasized reducing my direct involvement in day-to-day operations, while expanding David's authority over personnel decisions and policy implementation. These organizational improvements, Jessica concluded, would position Thompson Marketing Solutions for more sustainable growth while reducing the operational inefficiencies that often emerge when founding leadership fails to evolve appropriately. The phrase "founding leadership fails to evolve" crystallized everything problematic about Jessica's approach and apparent agenda. She was essentially arguing that my continued active involvement in the company I had built represented a fundamental problem requiring systematic correction through her professional intervention. When our meeting finally ended, I felt emotionally drained and professionally undermined in ways that seemed completely disproportionate to a routine HR discussion. Jessica's systematic criticism of my management approach, combined with her presumptuous organizational assessment activities, had created a hostile dynamic that felt more like a corporate coup attempt than collaborative problem-solving. The following morning brought new revelations about Jessica's unusual approach to her position. I arrived at the office to discover that she had scheduled individual meetings with every department head, ostensibly to establish baseline metrics for HR effectiveness measurement. The meetings were already underway when I learned about them, suggesting that Jessica had coordinated these sessions without informing me or seeking approval for such extensive employee engagement. Margaret Foster, our longtime office manager, approached me with obvious discomfort about her session with Jessica. "Lisa, I need to discuss something concerning about my meeting with the new HR person," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure privacy for our conversation. Margaret had been with Thompson Marketing Solutions for 7 years, serving as the informal heart of our workplace culture through her genuine care for employee well-being and her intuitive understanding of interpersonal dynamics. Her judgment about people and situations had proven reliable countless times, making her concerns about Jessica particularly significant. She asked very detailed questions about your daily schedule, your typical interactions with employees, and your decision-making processes, Margaret explained. The questions felt more like an investigation than a routine HR assessment. She wanted to know about specific instances where you had overruled David's recommendations or made decisions without consulting him first. The systematic nature of Jessica's inquiry pattern was becoming undeniable. Rather than learning about our company culture or understanding employee needs, She was gathering intelligence about my management practices and looking for evidence of decisions that could be characterized as problematic or inappropriate. She also asked about employee complaints or concerns regarding your leadership style, Margaret continued, her discomfort evident. When I told her that employees generally appreciate your hands-on approach and accessibility, she seemed disappointed and pressed for more critical feedback. The revelation that Jessica was actively seeking negative information about my leadership while expressing disappointment when employees provided positive assessments confirmed that her agenda extended far beyond routine HR functions. She was building a case against my management effectiveness using systematically gathered employee testimony. Did she explain why she needed this information? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Margaret shook her head. She mentioned something about establishing performance benchmarks and identifying opportunities for operational improvement, but her questions seemed much more specific and critical than those explanations would justify. Throughout that week, similar reports filtered back from other employees who had participated in Jessica's assessment sessions. The pattern was consistent: detailed questions about my management decisions, attempts to elicit criticisms of my leadership approach, and persistent probing for examples of workplace dissatisfaction or operational inefficiency. Tom Rodriguez, our senior web developer, described questions about whether he felt empowered to make independent decisions or constrained by excessive oversight from upper management. When he expressed satisfaction with our collaborative approach to project management, Jessica reportedly asked follow-up questions designed to identify potential frustrations or concerns he might not have initially recognized. It felt like she was trying to convince me that I should be unhappy with things I've never had problems with, Tom explained during one of our routine project check-ins. Very strange approach for someone who's supposed to be improving employee relations. The most disturbing report came from Jennifer Walsh, one of our account coordinators, who described Jessica's questions as almost like she was building a legal case against someone. Jennifer's background included paralegal training, giving her insights into investigative questioning techniques that made her particularly sensitive to Jessica's methodology. She asked about documentation of your decisions, whether you provided written justification for strategic choices, and whether employees had formal channels for appealing management decisions they disagreed with. Jennifer explained, "Those aren't typical HR questions about workplace satisfaction. They're the kind of questions someone asks when they're looking for evidence of improper management practices." The implications of Jessica's systematic investigation were becoming increasingly clear and deeply concerning. Rather than conducting routine HR assessments, she appeared to be gathering evidence that could be used to challenge my management effectiveness or even my fitness to lead the company I had created. My anxiety about Jessica's activities intensified when I learned that she had requested access to financial records, including payroll data, expense reports, and revenue breakdowns by client and department. When I questioned David about these requests, his defensive response revealed more about the situation than his actual words. Jessica needs comprehensive data to establish proper HR metrics and identify operational efficiency opportunities, he explained, avoiding eye contact as he spoke. You can't evaluate organizational effectiveness without understanding the financial framework that supports current operations. His explanation might have been convincing if Jessica's actual job responsibilities included organizational consulting or operational analysis. However, her position as employee relations manager typically involved much more limited access to financial information, primarily related to benefits administration and payroll processing rather than comprehensive business analysis. David, she's asking for client revenue data and profit margin information that's completely outside the scope of HR management, I pointed out. What possible HR purpose could require that level of financial detail? His response revealed frustration. That seemed disproportionate to my reasonable question about data security and appropriate access levels. Lisa, You're being paranoid about information sharing with our own employees. Jessica can't properly assess our organizational structure without understanding the financial context that shapes our operational decisions. The accusation of paranoia for questioning extensive data requests struck me as both professionally inappropriate and personally hurtful. David's characterization of reasonable security concerns as personality flaws represented a significant departure from his usual collaborative approach to sensitive business decisions. Furthermore, he continued, his tone becoming increasingly aggressive, your reluctance to share information with qualified professionals suggests you don't trust the people we hire to do their jobs effectively. That kind of micromanagement is exactly the type of leadership issue that creates workplace dysfunction. The circular logic was breathtaking. Questioning Jessica's data requests was evidence of the micromanagement problems that Jessica's investigation was designed to document. David was essentially arguing that my concerns about his decisions proved the validity of those decisions, while my objections demonstrated the problematic management style that justified Jessica's systematic assessment activities. Our conversation escalated into our first serious professional disagreement in years, with David becoming increasingly defensive about Jessica's methods, while I struggled to understand how routine HR hiring had evolved into comprehensive organizational restructuring. Without my knowledge or consent, the personal tension was unlike anything we had experienced in our professional partnership, suggesting that the issues extended beyond simple disagreements about workplace policy. By the end of Jessica's second week, the atmosphere in our office had shifted dramatically. Employees seemed more guarded in their interactions with me, as if they were conscious of being observed and evaluated in ways that hadn't previously been part of our workplace culture. The natural communication patterns that had characterized our collaborative environment were being replaced by something more formal and self-conscious. The change was subtle but unmistakable to someone who had spent 12 years building relationships with these people and creating an environment where authentic communication and mutual respect were foundational values. Jessica's presence had introduced an element of surveillance and evaluation that was fundamentally altering how employees interacted with management and with each other. During our weekly staff meeting, I noticed that employees were more hesitant to voice concerns or suggestions, as if they were uncertain about how their comments might be interpreted or documented. The open dialogue that had always characterized our team discussions was being replaced by careful, measured responses that suggested people were editing their thoughts for an invisible audience. "Is everything okay with the team?" I asked David, privately after the meeting. "People seem unusually quiet and formal today." His response was defensive and dismissive. Maybe they're finally learning to communicate professionally instead of treating every meeting like a casual conversation. Jessica's presence is encouraging more appropriate workplace behavior. The implication that our previous meeting dynamics had been unprofessional rather than collaborative was another subtle attack on the management approach that had built our successful company culture. David was reframing our strengths as weaknesses while positioning Jessica's influence as necessary, correction rather than destructive interference. The third week brought a discovery that transformed my growing concerns into genuine alarm. While working late one Thursday evening, I noticed that lights were still on in the administrative wing despite the office being officially closed. Assuming someone had forgotten to turn off their computer, I went to investigate and ensure our building was properly secured for the night. What I found was Jessica at her desk with sophisticated recording equipment that went far beyond anything required for routine HR functions. Professional-grade digital audio devices were connected to her computer, and her screen displayed what appeared to be detailed transcripts of conversations organized by date, time, and participant. The systematic documentation was extensive and meticulously organized. File folders labeled with employee names contained transcripts of their assessment sessions with Jessica, while other folders appeared to catalog my interactions with various staff members over the previous 3 weeks. The scope of the surveillance was breathtaking in its comprehensiveness and deeply disturbing in its implications. "Jessica," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet office as I approached her desk. What exactly are you doing here after hours? And what is all this recording? Equipment? She startled visibly, quickly minimizing the screen and attempting to cover the audio devices with papers and folders. Her professional composure cracked for the first time since her arrival, revealing something calculating and defensive beneath the polished exterior she had maintained. Mrs. Thompson, I didn't expect anyone else to be here this late, she replied, her voice tight with obvious stress. I was just catching up on some documentation work and organizational assessment reports. Documentation work that requires professional recording equipment? I asked, stepping closer to examine the devices she had tried to conceal. What exactly have you been recording, and who authorized these surveillance activities? Jessica's attempt to maintain her professional facade was visibly failing, as she struggled to find explanations that might justify the obvious scope of her monitoring activities. I've been documenting workplace interactions to establish baseline metrics for organizational effectiveness assessment. It's a standard methodology in professional HR consulting. The claim that recording employee conversations without their knowledge was standard HR practice was both legally questionable and ethically outrageous. Even if such methods were sometimes employed by external consultants, they required explicit consent from all participants and clear authorization from company leadership. Jessica, recording conversations without participants' knowledge or consent violates Ohio privacy laws and definitely breaches our employee confidentiality policies, I said firmly. I need you to immediately stop all recording activities and provide me with copies of everything you've documented. Her response revealed the true nature of her agenda and the extent of David's involvement in her surveillance activities. Instead of apologizing or acknowledging the inappropriate nature of her actions, Jessica became defensive and argumentative. David authorized this assessment methodology as part of my organizational development responsibilities, she replied, her tone shifting from defensive to defiant. I'm conducting a comprehensive evaluation of workplace dynamics and communication effectiveness. You should discuss any concerns about my methods with him before making accusations about legal violations. The implication that David had authorized extensive surveillance of my workplace interactions without my knowledge was profoundly shocking and personally devastating. If Jessica was telling the truth, my husband had conspired with another woman to systematically monitor and document my professional activities for reasons that remained unclear but were obviously hostile to my interests. I find it difficult to believe that David would authorize recording activities without discussing them with me first, I said. Though even as I spoke, I could feel my confidence in that belief beginning to waver. Jessica's smile returned, but it now carried a cold satisfaction that was completely different from her previous professional demeanor. Perhaps you should ask him directly. I'm sure he can explain the business rationale for objective documentation of management effectiveness and workplace dynamics. The suggestion that I needed David's permission to question surveillance activities in my own company was insulting beyond measure. But Jessica's confidence about his support suggested that their collaboration was more extensive than I had suspected. Her willingness to essentially dare me to confront David implied that she was certain he would defend her methods rather than support my concerns. Our confrontation continued for another 20 minutes, during which Jessica revealed that her documentation extended far beyond simple conversation transcripts. She had been systematically analyzing my decision-making patterns, cataloging instances where I had overruled David's recommendations, and identifying what she characterized as evidence of micromanagement and operational inefficiency. This comprehensive assessment, she explained with barely concealed satisfaction, provides objective data about management effectiveness that can guide necessary organizational improvements. Sometimes leaders are too close to their own operations to recognize systemic problems that are obvious to qualified outside observers. The condescending explanation positioned her surveillance as professional service rather than hostile investigation. while implying that any objections I raised simply demonstrated the leadership deficiencies her documentation was designed to expose. Jessica had created a perfect catch, 22. Questioning her methods proved the validity of her conclusions about my management problems. When I finally left the office that night, I was emotionally shattered and professionally violated in ways I had never experienced. The company I had built through 12 years of sacrifice and dedication had been turned into a surveillance operation designed to document my alleged shortcomings and build a case for my removal from active leadership. The drive home through Columbus's quiet streets gave me time to process the full implications of what I had discovered. Jessica's activities represented more than inappropriate HR practices or unauthorized surveillance. They constituted a systematic attack on my professional reputation and my authority within the company I had created, apparently with the collaboration and support of my own husband. The betrayal was multi-layered and devastating. David's participation in Jessica's surveillance activities violated not just our professional partnership, but our personal marriage and the trust that had sustained both relationships for 15 years. The man who shared my bed each night had been conspiring with another woman to systematically undermine my professional authority and document evidence that could be used to justify removing me from leadership of my own company. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully beside me, apparently untroubled by the knowledge that his wife had discovered his participation in a conspiracy against her professional and personal interests. His ability to sleep soundly while knowing about Jessica's surveillance activities suggested either remarkable compartmentalization or complete lack of guilt about betraying the woman who had supported him through unemployment and welcomed him into the business she had built from nothing. The following morning would bring the confrontation that would determine whether our marriage and business partnership could survive the revelations about David and Jessica's collaboration, or whether their betrayal had damaged our relationship beyond any possibility of repair or recovery. The confrontation with David that Friday morning would forever alter the landscape of our marriage and business partnership. I had spent the sleepless night planning how to address Jessica's surveillance activities and David's apparent authorization of her covert documentation project. The evidence was undeniable, but I still harbored hope that reasonable explanations might exist for what appeared to be systematic betrayal. David was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, standing at the counter with his back to me as he prepared coffee with unusual care and attention. His posture conveyed tension despite his attempt to maintain normal morning routines, suggesting he was aware that difficult conversations lay ahead. "We need to discuss Jessica's recording activities," I began without preamble, deciding that direct confrontation would be more effective than gradual revelation of my discoveries. David's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly, but he didn't turn around immediately. When he finally faced me, his expression was carefully controlled, revealing neither surprise nor guilt about my knowledge of Jessica's surveillance operations. "What recording activities?" he asked, his tone carrying just enough confusion to suggest innocence while avoiding outright denial of involvement or knowledge. "David, I found Jessica in the office last night with professional recording equipment and detailed transcripts of my conversations with employees over the past 3 weeks," I said firmly. "She claims you authorized these surveillance activities as part of her organizational assessment methodology." His response confirmed my worst fears about the extent of his collaboration with Jessica's hostile investigation. Instead of expressing shock or outrage about unauthorized surveillance in our workplace, David's primary concern seemed to be managing my reaction to discoveries he had apparently anticipated. "Lisa, you're overreacting to standard organizational consulting practices," he replied, his tone carrying the patronizing quality I had begun to recognize as his default response to my legitimate business concerns. "Jessica is conducting professional assessment work that requires objective documentation of workplace dynamics." The casual dismissal of covert recording as standard consulting practice was breathtaking in its dishonesty. David's corporate Background included extensive compliance training about workplace surveillance laws and employee privacy rights, making his characterization of Jessica's activities as routine particularly insulting to my intelligence. Standard practice involves obtaining consent from participants before recording their conversations, I pointed out. It also requires authorization from company leadership before implementing surveillance activities. Neither of those conditions was met. David's facade of reasonableness began cracking as he realized that simple deflection wouldn't resolve the situation. Sometimes objective assessment requires that subjects aren't aware they're being evaluated. If employees know their interactions are being documented, they modify their behavior and compromise the authenticity of the data. The clinical language he used to describe our employees as subjects and our workplace interactions as data revealed how completely his perspective had shifted from collaborative partnership to adversarial evaluation. The man who had once appreciated the personal relationships that drove our company's success was now viewing those same relationships as obstacles to objective analysis. David, those subjects are our friends and colleagues who trusted us with their careers and livelihoods, I said, struggling to maintain composure as the full implications of his betrayal became clear. Jessica's surveillance activities violate their privacy rights and potentially expose our company to significant legal liability. His response eliminated any remaining doubt about his active participation in Jessica's conspiracy against my leadership and professional reputation. Maybe if you weren't so defensive about legitimate feedback regarding your management approach, we wouldn't need objective documentation to identify operational problems, he said, his voice rising with frustration. Jessica's assessment reveals serious issues with your leadership style that you refuse to acknowledge or address. The accusation that my objection to covert surveillance demonstrated management deficiencies was psychologically manipulative and professionally outrageous. David was essentially arguing that my refusal to accept unauthorized monitoring proved the necessity of that monitoring, creating a circular logic that made any defense of my rights evidence of my unfitness for leadership. What specific management problems does Jessica's documentation supposedly reveal? I asked, curious about the case they had been building against my professional competence. David's eagerness to present their findings revealed how extensively he had collaborated with Jessica in analyzing and interpreting her surveillance data. He pulled out his phone and began reading from what appeared to be prepared talking points about my alleged leadership failures. Jessica's analysis shows that you consistently micromanage employees, undermining their autonomy and professional development, he began, his tone suggesting he was delivering objective findings rather than partisan accusations. Your decision-making process excludes input from qualified team members and prioritizes personal preferences over operational efficiency. The charges were carefully crafted to sound professionally legitimate, while ignoring the collaborative decision-making processes and employee development programs that had actually characterized my leadership approach for 12 years. Jessica had apparently documented isolated incidents out of context while ignoring contradictory evidence of successful teamwork and employee satisfaction. Furthermore, David continued, your resistance to modernizing our operational systems and implementing industry-standard management practices is limiting our growth potential and creating workplace dysfunction. The systematic nature of their critique became increasingly clear as David presented additional allegations about my communication style, strategic planning abilities, and resistance to professional development. Jessica had created a comprehensive indictment of my leadership that characterized every strength as a weakness and every success as accidental rather than deliberate. David, these criticisms ignore 12 years of documented success in building client relationships, developing employee talents, and creating profitable growth, I pointed out. They also conveniently overlook the fact that employees consistently express satisfaction with our workplace culture and management approach. His response revealed the true agenda behind Jessica's assessment activities and the extent of their conspiracy to undermine my authority within the company I had created. Employee satisfaction surveys can be misleading when employees feel pressured to provide positive feedback to avoid negative consequences, he explained with practiced condescension. Jessica's covert documentation captures authentic workplace dynamics without the distortion created by employees managing their responses to please management. The implication that our employees had been living in fear of retaliation for honest feedback was both insulting to their integrity and completely inconsistent with the open communication culture we had cultivated. David was rewriting our entire company history to support Jessica's hostile assessment and justify their collaborative efforts to document my alleged failures. Our conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, during which David revealed the extensive planning and coordination that had preceded Jessica's hiring and surveillance activities. Her arrival at Thompson Marketing Solutions hadn't been the result of chance networking or sudden availability, but rather the culmination of months of preparation and strategic positioning. Jessica and I have been discussing organizational optimization strategies since early summer, David admitted when pressed about the timeline of their relationship. She identified several systemic issues with our current management structure and recommended assessment methodologies that could provide objective data about necessary improvements. The revelation that David had been secretly collaborating with Jessica for months before her hiring eliminated any possibility that their relationship was purely professional or their assessment activities were routine HR functions. They had been planning a systematic attack on my leadership while I remained completely unaware of their conspiracy. So Jessica's assessment was predetermined rather than objective, I concluded. She arrived with pre-existing opinions about management problems and used surveillance activities to gather evidence supporting those predetermined conclusions. David's response confirmed the coordinated nature of their efforts and revealed the ultimate goal of their documentation project. Jessica's professional expertise allowed her to identify organizational dysfunction that you refuse to acknowledge, he said defensively. Her assessment provides the objective evidence necessary to implement improvements that will benefit everyone involved. The phrase "implement improvements" suggested that their documentation project was intended to justify specific changes to our company structure, potentially including alterations to my role or authority that would require the kind of evidence Jessica had been systematically gathering. "What improvements are you planning to implement?" I asked directly. David's hesitation revealed that they had indeed developed specific plans for restructuring our company based on Jessica's findings, but he was reluctant to reveal those plans. Before completing their documentation and building what they considered an unassailable case for change, we need to complete the assessment process before making specific recommendations, he said evasively. Premature changes without comprehensive data could create additional problems rather than solving existing issues. His refusal to discuss their actual plans confirmed my suspicions that Jessica's surveillance activities were designed to build a case for significant changes to our management structure, potentially including my removal from active leadership or dramatic reduction of my authority within the company I had built. The weekend that followed was filled with tense silence and careful avoidance of direct confrontation, as both David and I processed the implications of our Friday morning conversation. The comfortable domestic routines that had sustained our marriage for 15 years felt artificial and hollow when viewed through the lens of his professional betrayal and personal deception. I spent Saturday afternoon consulting with Patricia Wells about the legal implications of Jessica's surveillance activities and the potential business consequences of David's collaboration in unauthorized workplace monitoring. Patricia's response was immediate and unequivocal about both the legal violations and the protective measures available under our existing corporate structure. Lisa, Jessica's recording activities violate several Ohio statutes regarding workplace, surveillance, and employee privacy rights, Patricia explained during our emergency weekend consultation. More importantly, her unauthorized access to confidential employee information breaches the confidentiality agreements we updated specifically to prevent this type of data misuse. Patricia's legal analysis revealed that Jessica's activities exposed our company to significant liability while creating grounds for both civil and criminal prosecution of the individuals involved in the unauthorized surveillance scheme. Additionally, David's authorization of these activities without board approval violates his fiduciary duties as a corporate officer, she continued. The governance structure we established specifically requires unanimous board consent for any surveillance or investigation activities affecting company operations. The protective measures we had implemented over the years were proving their value in ways I had never anticipated. Patricia's insistence on comprehensive corporate governance documents and detailed confidentiality agreements had created multiple layers of legal protection that made Jessica and David's conspiracy both ineffective and prosecutable. What are our options for addressing these violations? I asked. Patricia's response outlined a range of escalating interventions designed to protect both our business interests and my personal authority, while ensuring that Jessica and David faced appropriate consequences for their unauthorized activities. We can begin with immediate termination of Jessica's employment based on documented violations of her confidentiality agreement and unauthorized surveillance activities, she explained. We can also implement emergency access restrictions to prevent further data collection or potential sabotage of company systems. The legal framework for protecting our business was comprehensive and immediately actionable. But Patricia's analysis also revealed more complex issues related to David's continuing role in the company and our marriage. David's participation in Jessica's surveillance scheme creates both business and personal complications that may require separate legal strategies, she warned. His violation of fiduciary duties could justify removing him from corporate governance roles, but his ownership stake and marital relationship create additional considerations for any enforcement actions. Monday morning brought the confrontation that would determine whether David and Jessica's conspiracy could continue or whether my legal protections would prove sufficient to end their systematic attack on my professional authority. I arrived at the office early, planning to implement Patricia's recommended security measures before other employees arrived and potentially complicated the situation. Jessica was already at her desk when I entered the building, apparently continuing her surveillance activities despite our previous confrontations about the unauthorized nature of her recording project. Her brazen disregard for my explicit instructions to cease all monitoring activities confirmed that she felt protected by David's support and confident that her documentation efforts couldn't be effectively challenged. "Jessica, I need to speak with you immediately in my office," I said firmly, maintaining professional composure despite my anger about her continued defiance of direct orders. Her response revealed the true extent of her arrogance and the confidence she derived from David's collaboration in her systematic attack on my authority. "I'm afraid I have prior commitments this morning," she replied without looking up from her computer screen. David scheduled several priority assessment sessions that can't be rescheduled without compromising the integrity of our ongoing organizational evaluation. The casual dismissal of my direct request for an immediate meeting was unprecedented in our workplace culture and demonstrated how completely Jessica had abandoned any pretense of acknowledging my authority as company founder and majority owner. "Jessica, this isn't a request. You will come to my office immediately, or you can consider this your termination notice," I said, my voice carrying the authority that 12 years of successful leadership had earned. Her reaction confirmed that she and David had anticipated this confrontation and prepared strategies for undermining my ability to terminate her employment or restrict her access to company systems and information. "I don't believe you have the unilateral authority to terminate my employment without proper documentation of performance issues and following established progressive discipline procedures," she replied with practiced confidence. "David and I have discussed the importance of following proper HR protocols to avoid potential legal complications. The implication that I lacked authority to fire employees in my own company was staggering in its presumption, but Jessica's Confidence suggested that she and David had researched potential challenges to my management decisions and developed strategies for resisting accountability for their unauthorized activities. Furthermore, she continued, my assessment activities are conducted under David's direct supervision and authorization. Any concerns about my methodology should be addressed through proper management channels rather than unilateral demands. From individuals who lack comprehensive understanding of modern HR practices. The reference to me as an individual who lacked understanding of HR practices in my own company was insulting beyond measure. But Jessica's tone suggested she genuinely believed that David's support granted her immunity from my authority as founder and majority shareholder. Our standoff continued for several more minutes, during which Jessica made it clear that she intended to continue her surveillance activities regardless of my objections, and that she considered David's authorization sufficient to override any concerns I might raise about her methods or conclusions. The situation reached a breaking point when other employees began arriving and witnessing our confrontation in the main office area. Jessica's public defiance of my direct orders was creating a spectacle that threatened to undermine my authority, with the entire staff while demonstrating her contempt for normal workplace hierarchy and professional respect. Jessica, you have exactly 60 seconds to gather your personal belongings and leave this building, I announced loudly enough for nearby employees to hear clearly. Security has been notified to escort you from the premises if you're not gone. Voluntarily. Her final response revealed the full scope of her delusions about her protected status and the extent of David's promises about supporting her position against my authority. You'll be hearing from our attorney about wrongful termination and violations of established employment procedures, she said as she slowly gathered a few items from her desk. David will ensure that proper legal action is taken to address this. Inappropriate retaliation against legitimate professional assessment activities. The threat of legal action for terminating an employee who had violated confidentiality agreements, conducted unauthorized surveillance, and publicly defied direct orders from company leadership was absurd. But Jessica's confidence about David's support suggested their conspiracy extended beyond workplace surveillance to coordinated legal strategies for challenging my authority. As Jessica finally left the building, followed by the security personnel Patricia had arranged, I realized that the easy part of addressing their conspiracy was complete. The more difficult challenge would be confronting David's role in authorizing and supporting activities that violated both legal requirements and the trust that had sustained our professional and personal relationship for years. The employees, who had witnessed Jessica's termination and defiant departure, were clearly confused and concerned about the implications for their own job security and the stability of our workplace culture. Their faces reflected the kind of uncertainty that could quickly undermine morale and productivity if not addressed through honest communication about the circumstances surrounding Jessica's removal. I know this morning's events were unusual and concerning, I announced to the gathered staff. Jessica's employment was terminated due to serious violations of confidentiality agreements and unauthorized surveillance activities that violated both company policy and state law. These issues had nothing to do with anyone else's job performance or security. The relief on their faces was immediate and obvious, as they realized that Jessica's termination was related to her specific misconduct rather than broader organizational problems or downsizing decisions. Several employees approached me privately throughout the morning to express appreciation for ending what they had increasingly recognized as inappropriate monitoring and evaluation activities. I never felt comfortable with her constant questions about management decisions and workplace satisfaction, admitted Karen Stevens, one of our senior account executives. It felt more like an investigation than routine HR assessment. Similar feedback from other staff members confirmed that Jessica's surveillance activities had been creating exactly the kind of workplace tension and uncertainty that undermined the collaborative culture I had worked 12 years to build and maintain. The immediate crisis of Jessica's presence had been resolved through her termination, but the underlying issues with David's betrayal and conspiracy remained to be addressed. His authorization of unauthorized surveillance His collaboration with Jessica's hostile assessment activities and his willingness to undermine my authority suggested problems that couldn't be resolved through simple termination of his co-conspirator. That afternoon brought the confrontation with David that would determine whether our marriage and business partnership could survive his collaboration with Jessica's systematic attack on my professional reputation and personal authority, or whether his betrayal had permanently damaged the trust and respect that had sustained both relationships for 15 years. The afternoon following Jessica's termination brought the reckoning I had been dreading yet knew was inevitable. David's betrayal extended far beyond poor professional judgment or misguided loyalty to an inappropriate employee. His months-long collaboration with Jessica's surveillance operation represented a fundamental violation of trust that called into question everything I believed about our marriage and business partnership. I waited in my office until the last employee had left for the day, wanting privacy for what would likely be the most difficult conversation of our 15-year marriage. David had been conspicuously absent from the office during Jessica's dramatic departure, avoiding the confrontation he surely knew was coming. His cowardice in hiding while I dealt with the consequences of his conspiracy only deepened my sense of betrayal and disappointment. When David finally appeared in my doorway near 6 o'clock, his expression carried defiance rather than remorse. He entered my office with the aggressive posture of someone preparing for battle rather than the humble demeanor of someone seeking forgiveness for serious wrongdoing. "I assume you're satisfied with your performance this morning," he began without preamble, his tone dripping with sarcasm and resentment. "Jessica was conducting legitimate professional assessment work, and your paranoid overreaction has cost us valuable insights into operational improvements that could have benefited everyone." The audacity of characterizing Jessica's illegal surveillance as legitimate professional work while describing my response as paranoid overreaction revealed how completely David had abandoned any pretense of acknowledging my rights or authority as company founder and majority owner. "David, Jessica was conducting unauthorized surveillance that violated state law and breached confidentiality agreements you helped create," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building within me. "Her activities exposed our company to significant legal liability while violating the privacy rights of every employee she recorded without consent." His response eliminated any lingering hope that reasonable explanations might exist for his collaboration with Jessica's systematic attack on my professional reputation and personal authority. "Sometimes effective organizational assessment requires methods that make uncomfortable people even more uncomfortable," he said with barely concealed contempt. "Your resistance to objective evaluation of your management effectiveness demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership problems Jessica was documenting." The circular logic was identical to his previous attempts to justify surveillance activities. My objection to unauthorized monitoring proved the necessity of that monitoring, while my discomfort with covert documentation demonstrated the management deficiencies that documentation was designed to expose. "David, effective organizational assessment involves transparent methodologies with informed consent from participants," I pointed out. "It doesn't involve secret surveillance operations conducted by individuals with personal agendas and predetermined conclusions." His reaction revealed how deeply Jessica had influenced his perception of our business operations and my role in the company's success. The man who had once appreciated my hands-on leadership approach and collaborative decision-making style now viewed those same qualities as evidence of dysfunction requiring correction. "Personal agendas," he repeated with a bitter laugh. "Jessica's only agenda was helping our company overcome the operational limitations created by your inability to delegate authority and trust qualified professionals to do their jobs." The accusation that I was unable to delegate authority ignored 12 years of successful collaboration with talented employees who had grown professionally while contributing to our company's expansion and profitability. David was rewriting our entire business history to support Jessica's hostile assessment and justify his participation in her conspiracy. "Furthermore," he continued, Your termination of Jessica demonstrates exactly the kind of vindictive decision-making that creates toxic workplace environments. You fired someone for doing her job professionally because you couldn't handle honest feedback about your management approach. The characterization of illegal surveillance as professional job performance, while describing appropriate consequences as vindictive decision-making, revealed how completely David had adopted Jessica's perspective on our business operations and my fitness for leadership. Our conversation continued for nearly 3 hours, during which David revealed the extent of his collaboration with Jessica's systematic attack on my authority and the specific changes they had planned to implement based on her surveillance findings. Their conspiracy extended far beyond simple organizational assessment to comprehensive restructuring that would fundamentally alter my role in the company I had built. Jessica's documentation provides objective evidence that our current management structure is inefficient and potentially harmful to employee satisfaction and business growth, David explained with the rehearsed confidence of someone presenting carefully prepared arguments. Her recommendations include significant changes to decision-making authority and operational oversight that would improve our professional effectiveness. The vague language about decision-making authority and operational oversight clearly referred to reducing my involvement in day-to-day business operations while expanding David's control over personnel decisions and strategic planning. Jessica's surveillance had been designed to build a case for marginalizing my influence within my own company. What specific changes were you planning to implement? I asked directly, wanting explicit confirmation of their intentions. David's hesitation revealed that their plans were more extensive and hostile than he was comfortable admitting, but his eventual response confirmed my worst suspicions about the ultimate goals of their collaboration. Jessica recommended establishing a more professional management hierarchy with clear chains of command and appropriate delegation of responsibilities, he said carefully. Your tendency to micromanage operations could be addressed by limiting your direct involvement in routine business functions while focusing your energy on strategic planning and client development. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the fact that their recommendations involved removing me from active management of the company I had created while relegating me to a figurehead role with limited authority over actual operations. Additionally, David continued, implementing modern HR practices and employee relations protocols would require someone with Jessica's expertise in organizational development and workplace optimization. The implication that Jessica's reinstatement was necessary for implementing their planned changes revealed that her termination was viewed as a temporary setback rather than permanent resolution of the surveillance crisis. David apparently expected that their documentation would eventually justify overruling my personnel decisions and restoring Jessica to a position of influence within our organization. David, Jessica will never work for this company again, I said firmly. Her surveillance activities violated multiple laws and ethical standards that make her unemployable in any legitimate HR capacity. His response revealed the depth of his delusions about Jessica's protected status and his own authority to override my decisions about company personnel and operations. Your personal animosity toward Jessica doesn't change the professional value of her assessment work or the validity of her recommendations for organizational improvement, he replied dismissively. Board review of her findings might lead to different conclusions about her continued employment and the implementation of her suggested reforms. The reference to board review was particularly outrageous since David and I constituted the entire board of directors, and my 75% ownership stake gave me controlling authority over all major business decisions. His suggestion that board action might override my personnel decisions revealed how completely he had lost touch with both legal reality and corporate governance principles. David, I am the board majority, I reminded him. There is no mechanism for overruling my decisions about company operations or employee terminations. His expression shifted to something approaching panic as he realized that his assumptions about shared authority and democratic decision-making had no basis in our actual corporate structure or ownership arrangements. "Lisa, you can't run this company like a personal dictatorship," he said desperately. "Successful businesses require collaborative leadership and professional management practices that consider input from qualified stakeholders." The characterization of majority ownership as personal dictatorship, while describing his collaboration with Jessica's surveillance operation as collaborative leadership, revealed how distorted his understanding of business operations and professional relationships had become. Throughout our conversation, David consistently avoided taking responsibility for his role in authorizing and supporting Jessica's illegal activities. Instead, he portrayed himself as an innocent advocate for professional development who had been victimized by my unreasonable resistance to legitimate organizational improvement. I was trying to help our company grow beyond the limitations created by founder-centered management, he explained with apparent sincerity. Jessica's expertise could have guided us through the transition to more sophisticated operational systems that would benefit everyone involved. The implication that founder involvement represented a limitation requiring correction ignored the reality that founder leadership had created the success Jessica claimed to be optimizing. David was arguing that the very qualities that had built our profitable business now represented obstacles to continued growth. His refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing in collaborating with unauthorized surveillance, while consistently blaming me for creating the problems Jessica was supposedly documenting, made productive dialogue impossible. David had apparently convinced himself that his betrayal was actually professional service, while my objections represented personal weakness. The conversation reached its breaking point when David demanded that I apologize to Jessica for wrongful termination and reinstate her employment with expanded authority over organizational development and employee relations. Jessica deserves an apology for the hostile treatment she received while conducting legitimate professional assessment work, he insisted with remarkable audacity. Her expertise could still benefit our company if you're willing to acknowledge your mistakes and work collaboratively toward genuine organizational improvement. The demand that I apologize to someone who had systematically violated my privacy and authority while conspiring with my husband to undermine my professional reputation was so outrageous that it clarified the complete impossibility of reconciling our relationship or continuing our business partnership. David, I will never apologize to Jessica for terminating her employment after discovering her illegal surveillance activities, I said with finality. More importantly, your collaboration with her systematic attack on my authority makes it impossible for us to continue working together professionally. His reaction confirmed that he viewed our marriage and business partnership as leverage he could use to force acceptance of Jessica's continued involvement in our company operations. If you can't work with me professionally, then maybe you need to consider whether you're capable of working with anyone professionally, he replied with calculated cruelty. Your isolation and defensive behavior suggest deeper problems that go beyond specific personnel disagreements. The psychological manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication and maliciousness. David was attempting to gaslight me into believing that my objection to surveillance and betrayal indicated mental health problems rather than appropriate responses to genuine misconduct. That evening, I called Patricia Wells to discuss the legal implications of David's continued defense of Jessica's activities and his apparent intention to challenge my authority over company operations and personnel decisions. Lisa, David's statements about board authority and organizational restructuring reveal fundamental misunderstandings about corporate governance and ownership rights, Patricia explained during our emergency consultation. His threats to override your personnel decisions have no legal basis and could constitute grounds for removing him from any corporate governance role. Patricia's analysis confirmed that the protective measures we had implemented over the years provided comprehensive defenses against the kind of internal conspiracy David and Jessica had attempted to execute. Additionally, his continued defense of illegal surveillance activities after being informed about legal violations could constitute obstruction or conspiracy charges depending on the scope of his ongoing involvement, she warned. The legal framework for addressing David's betrayal was clear and immediately actionable. But Patricia's recommendations included considerations about the personal and financial implications of enforcing corporate governance against my own husband. Removing David from corporate governance roles would also affect his ownership stake and profit-sharing arrangements, she explained. The morality clauses we included in ownership agreements specifically address actions detrimental to company interests, including collaboration with activities that expose the business to legal liability. The conversation with Patricia clarified that I had both the legal authority and moral justification to protect my company from David's continued collaboration with hostile surveillance, while ensuring that appropriate consequences followed his violation of fiduciary duties and betrayal of trust. The following week brought a series of conversations with employees who had been affected by Jessica's surveillance activities and David's conspiracy to undermine my authority. Their feedback provided additional confirmation that my decision to terminate Jessica and confront David had been necessary to preserve both our workplace culture and business integrity. The atmosphere in the office has completely changed since Jessica left, reported Tom Rodriguez during one of our routine project meetings. People seem more relaxed and willing to communicate openly without worrying about being secretly recorded or evaluated. Similar observations from other staff members confirmed that Jessica's surveillance operation had indeed created the kind of workplace tension and uncertainty that undermined productivity and employee satisfaction. I never understood why she was asking such detailed questions about management decisions and employee relationships, added Sarah Chen. It felt invasive and inappropriate for someone who was supposed to be helping with HR functions. The unanimous relief expressed by employees about Jessica's departure validated my concerns about her methodology and agenda, while demonstrating that her activities had been harmful to morale rather than beneficial to organizational development. More significantly, several employees privately shared that they had been uncomfortable with David's apparent collaboration with Jessica's investigation, but had felt unable to raise concerns directly with management about his inappropriate involvement. We could tell that David was supporting Jessica's assessment activities even when they seemed to cross professional boundaries, explained Jennifer Walsh. It created a really awkward dynamic where we weren't sure whether complaints about her methods would be taken seriously. The revelation that employees had recognized David's collaboration with Jessica's inappropriate activities but felt unable to report their concerns highlighted how his betrayal had compromised not just my authority, but the trust and communication that sustained our workplace culture. Throughout the following month, I implemented comprehensive changes to our corporate governance structure designed to prevent future surveillance operations, while strengthening protections for employee privacy and company proprietary information. Patricia's recommendations included enhanced confidentiality agreements, stricter access controls for sensitive data, and clear protocols for reporting unauthorized monitoring or investigation activities. These new protections, Patricia explained, will ensure that any future attempts at covert surveillance or unauthorized data collection can be immediately identified and prosecuted under both employment law and criminal statutes. The updated policies also included specific provisions addressing conflicts of interest and inappropriate personal relationships that could compromise professional judgment or create hostile workplace environments. David's response to these policy changes confirmed that he viewed them as personal attacks rather than necessary business protections. His increasingly defensive and hostile attitude made productive collaboration impossible, while reinforcing my conclusion that our professional partnership could not continue. These new policies are obviously designed to prevent legitimate organizational assessment and professional development, he complained during one of our final business meetings. Your paranoia about surveillance is creating barriers to normal HR functions and employee relations work. His continued characterization of illegal surveillance as legitimate assessment while describing appropriate security measures as paranoia demonstrated how completely he had abandoned any commitment to legal compliance or ethical business practices. The divorce proceedings that began in late November were complicated by the need to disentangle 15 years of marriage from 12 years of business partnership. But Patricia's comprehensive corporate governance documents ensured that my majority, ownership, and management authority remained protected throughout the legal process. The prenuptial agreement we updated 3 years ago specifically addresses business assets and ownership stakes, Patricia explained during our strategy sessions. David's violation of fiduciary duties and collaboration with activities detrimental to company interests triggers the morality clauses that protect your controlling interest. The legal protections we had implemented proved their value in ways I had never anticipated, providing security for both my personal assets and business authority during the most challenging period of my professional and personal life. By spring, Thomson Marketing Solutions had not only recovered from the crisis created by David and Jessica's conspiracy, but had emerged stronger and more successful than ever. The removal of their toxic influence allowed our authentic workplace culture to flourish while our team rallied around the collaborative values that had always driven our success. The company feels like itself again, observed Margaret Foster during one of our staff meetings. The tension and uncertainty that developed during Jessica's time here has completely disappeared. The employees who had weathered the surveillance crisis with loyalty and professionalism became even more committed to our shared success, having witnessed firsthand the importance of protecting the workplace culture we had built together. 6 months after Jessica's termination and David's removal from company operations, Thomson Marketing Solutions achieved record revenue and client satisfaction scores while earning recognition as one of Columbus's best employers in the professional services sector. Your leadership during the crisis demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and strength that employees want to see from management, explained Karen Stevens during our quarterly review meeting. People respect leaders who protect their interests and stand up for what's right. The personal growth I experienced throughout the ordeal proved even more valuable than the business success that followed. Learning to trust my instincts about people and situations while standing firm against manipulation and betrayal had strengthened my confidence and clarified my values in ways that would benefit every aspect of my future. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the worst betrayals, I reflected during a team celebration of our record-breaking quarter. David and Jessica's conspiracy forced me to recognize strengths I didn't know I possessed and implement protections that made our company more secure than ever. The legal safeguards that had initially seemed like excessive caution proved essential for preserving everything I had worked to build, while the crisis itself revealed which relationships were authentic and which were opportunistic. Looking back, I recognize that David and Jessica's systematic attempt to undermine my authority ultimately strengthened my leadership and deepened my appreciation for the employees who remained loyal throughout the crisis. Their betrayal was painful, but not devastating, because the foundation I had built over 12 years was stronger than their ability to destroy it. The surveillance equipment that Jessica thought would document my failures instead created evidence of her own illegal activities, while the conspiracy that David believed would enhance his authority actually resulted in his complete removal from the company he had hoped to control. Sometimes the people closest to you reveal their true character when they believe they have found leverage to use against your success. But wisdom lies in building protections that make such betrayals costly and ineffective, while surrounding yourself with people whose loyalty is based on respect rather than opportunity. The company that emerged from David and Jessica's attack was more successful, more secure, and more authentic than anything I could have built without learning those hard lessons about trust, boundaries, and the importance of protecting what you've earned through your own dedication and sacrifice. 2 years after the surveillance crisis that nearly destroyed everything I had built, I stood in the conference room of our expanded headquarters, looking out at the faces of 63 employees gathered for our annual company meeting. The transformation of Thomson Marketing Solutions from a business under attack to a thriving industry leader seemed almost miraculous, though I knew it was the result of hard-won wisdom and unwavering commitment to authentic values. The morning sunlight streaming through our new floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated award plaques from marketing associations, framed testimonials from grateful clients, and photographs from company retreats that captured our team's genuine enthusiasm for the work we did together. These weren't just decorative elements, but tangible evidence of the culture we had rebuilt from the ashes of David and Jessica's attempted sabotage. When I founded this company 12 years ago, I began, addressing the assembled staff with confidence I had never possessed before the crisis. I believed that success came from hard work, creative thinking, and genuine care for both our clients and each other. The challenges we faced 2 years ago tested those beliefs in ways I never anticipated, but they also proved that authentic leadership and mutual respect create foundations strong enough to withstand any attack. The faces looking back at me reflected the deep trust and loyalty that had emerged from our shared experience of defending what we had built together. These weren't just employees earning paychecks, but partners committed to our collective success and the values that made that success meaningful. Today, I want to share some exciting news about our continued growth and the opportunities that lie ahead, I continued, gesturing toward the financial reports that told the story of our remarkable recovery and expansion. The numbers were impressive. By any measure, revenue had increased by 85% since the crisis. Client satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs, and employee retention had become the envy of our industry. More importantly, these metrics reflected genuine improvements in our operations and culture, rather than superficial manipulations of data. But before we discuss our future plans, I said, shifting to a more personal tone, I want to acknowledge the journey that brought us to this moment and the lessons we learned about protecting what matters most. The surveillance crisis had indeed taught us invaluable lessons about workplace security, employee privacy, and the importance of clear boundaries between personal relationships and professional responsibilities. These weren't abstract principles, but practical wisdom earned through difficult experience and applied with careful attention to both legal requirements and ethical standards. The security protocols we implemented after the surveillance incident have become models for other companies in our industry, I explained, referencing the comprehensive privacy protections and access controls that now safeguarded our operations. Our commitment to transparency and employee rights has attracted top talent who value authentic leadership and genuine workplace culture. The enhanced security measures had indeed attracted attention from industry publications and professional associations who recognized our approach as innovative and effective. What had begun as defensive responses to specific threats had evolved into proactive leadership in workplace privacy and employee protection. Margaret Foster, now our Director of Operations, had played a crucial role in implementing these improvements, while maintaining the collaborative atmosphere that defined our company culture. Her promotion from office manager to senior leadership reflected both her exceptional capabilities and our commitment to recognizing talent from within our existing team. Margaret's leadership in developing our new employee advocacy programs has set standards that other companies are now working to match, I announced, acknowledging her contributions to our transformation and growth. The employee advocacy programs were perhaps our most significant innovation, creating formal channels for addressing workplace concerns while ensuring that all voices were heard and respected. These systems provided the transparency and accountability that Jessica's covert surveillance had claimed to seek, but through legitimate and ethical methodologies. We've also established partnerships with leading universities to offer continuing education opportunities for our staff, I continued, outlining additional benefits that reflected our investment in employee development and professional growth. These educational partnerships had emerged from our recognition that genuine organizational improvement required ongoing learning and skill development rather than punitive assessment and criticism. By supporting our employees' professional advancement, we created loyalty and engagement that no amount of surveillance or documentation could achieve. The legal consequences for David and Jessica's conspiracy had been both swift and comprehensive. Jessica faced criminal charges for illegal workplace surveillance and violation of privacy laws, resulting in significant fines and professional sanctions that effectively ended her career in human resources. Her name appeared on industry watch lists that prevented her from securing similar positions with other companies. David's violations of fiduciary duty and collaboration with activities detrimental to company interests had triggered the morality clauses Patricia had wisely included in our ownership agreements. His 25% stake in Thompson Marketing Solutions was dissolved, and he was permanently barred from any governance role within the organization. The divorce proceedings had been finalized 18 months earlier, with David receiving financial settlements that reflected his limited contributions to our business success, while protecting my majority ownership and management authority. Patricia's comprehensive legal framework had ensured that personal relationship dissolution didn't compromise business continuity or employee security. I'm also pleased to announce our expansion into healthcare technology marketing, I said, returning to our current achievements and future opportunities. This new division will allow us to serve clients at the forefront of medical innovation while maintaining our commitment to authentic relationship building and creative problem solving. The expansion into healthcare technology represented both strategic growth and vindication of the management approach that David and Jessica had attempted to characterize as outdated and ineffective. Our success had attracted the attention of cutting-edge companies who valued our collaborative methodology and proven track record of delivering results through genuine partnership. Leading this new division will be Sarah Chen, whose creative vision and technical expertise make her perfectly suited for this exciting challenge, I announced, acknowledging another internal promotion that demonstrated our commitment to developing existing talent. Sarah's advancement from senior account manager to division director reflected the kind of career growth that authentic leadership makes possible. Her success disproved David's claims that my management style hindered employee development or limited professional opportunities within our organization. The personal growth I had experienced throughout the ordeal proved even more valuable than our business success. Learning to trust my instincts about people and situations while maintaining firm boundaries against manipulation and betrayal had strengthened my confidence and clarified my values in ways that benefited every aspect of my life. The crisis we weathered taught me that authentic leadership isn't about avoiding conflict or seeking universal approval, I reflected during the question and answer session that followed my presentation. It's about standing firm in your principles while remaining open to genuine feedback and continuous improvement. This distinction between constructive criticism and hostile attack had been crucial to my development as a leader. David and Jessica's systematic assault on my authority had been designed to serve their interests rather than improve our operations, while the feedback I received from loyal employees was offered in service of our shared success. I've also learned that the strongest protection against betrayal isn't avoiding trust entirely, but building systems and relationships that make betrayal costly and difficult to execute, I continued, addressing questions about how other leaders could protect themselves from similar attacks. The legal safeguards Patricia had implemented, the corporate governance structures that protected ownership rights, and the authentic relationships built through years of consistent integrity had created multiple layers of defense against internal threats. These protections hadn't prevented David and Jessica's conspiracy, but they had made that conspiracy ineffective and ultimately self-defeating. Most importantly, I concluded, I've discovered that surviving betrayal with your values intact makes you stronger and more effective than you were before the attack. The people and principles that proved reliable under pressure are the foundation for everything that follows. The employees who had remained loyal throughout the surveillance crisis had indeed proven themselves to be partners worth fighting. For, while the departure of those who collaborated with hostile activities had actually strengthened our team by removing sources of dysfunction and divided loyalty. As the company meeting concluded and employees returned to their work with renewed enthusiasm for our shared mission, I remained in the conference room for a few minutes of quiet reflection on the journey that had brought us to this moment of triumph and vindication. The view from our new headquarters encompassed much of downtown Columbus, including the building where David now worked as a mid-level operations manager for a company that appreciated his corporate methodology while keeping him far from strategic, decision-making roles. His career had stagnated following his removal from Thomson Marketing Solutions, as industry connections became aware of his role in the surveillance conspiracy. Jessica's attempts to rebuild her professional reputation had been even less successful. The criminal convictions and professional sanctions resulting from her illegal activities had made her unemployable in legitimate human resources roles, while her name appeared in case studies about workplace surveillance abuse that served as warnings to other HR professionals. Sometimes justice isn't dramatic or immediate, I mused to Margaret as she joined me in the empty conference room. But it's thorough and permanent when it finally arrives. The consequences David and Jessica faced weren't the result of vindictive retaliation, but natural outcomes of their choices to violate legal and ethical boundaries in pursuit of personal advantage. Their systematic attack on my authority had ultimately destroyed their own credibility and professional prospects. What strikes me most, Margaret observed, is how much stronger and more successful we became after removing their toxic influence. It's like their negativity was holding us back in ways we didn't even recognize at the time. Her insight captured something profound about the relationship between authentic culture and business performance. David and Jessica's conspiracy had created workplace tension and uncertainty that undermined productivity and innovation, while their removal had unleashed creative energy and collaborative spirit that drove our remarkable growth. The legacy of the surveillance crisis extended beyond Thomson Marketing Solutions to influence industry practices and legal protections for other companies facing similar threats. Patricia's innovative corporate governance structures had been adopted by numerous professional services firms, while our employee advocacy programs served as models for ethical workplace management. I've been invited to speak at the Ohio Business Ethics Conference next month about leadership during crisis and the importance of legal preparedness, I told Margaret, sharing news of the recognition our approach had received from professional associations. These speaking opportunities represented not just personal validation, but chances to help other leaders protect themselves and their organizations from the kind of internal attacks we had successfully repelled. The wisdom gained through our difficult experience could serve as valuable guidance for others facing similar challenges. The conference presentation would focus on practical strategies for implementing protective legal frameworks while maintaining authentic workplace culture and employee trust. The key insight I plan to share was that genuine security comes from transparency and accountability rather than surveillance and control. As evening approached and our expanded headquarters gradually quieted, I walked through the offices, where my employees had spent another productive day serving clients and advancing their careers within our thriving organization. The computers, conference rooms, and workstations represented more than business infrastructure, but the physical foundation for dreams and aspirations that deserved protection from those who would exploit them for personal gain. The recording equipment Jessica had used to document my alleged management failures had been turned over to law enforcement as evidence in her criminal prosecution. Those devices, designed to capture proof of my unfitness for leadership, had instead created an permanent record of her illegal activities and systematic violations of employee privacy rights. The transcripts David had viewed as objective documentation of organizational problems were now stored in legal files as evidence of conspiracy and betrayal. Their supposed evidence of my leadership deficiencies had been revealed as manipulated, data designed to serve predetermined conclusions rather than genuine assessment of workplace dynamics. The most valuable lesson, I reflected as I prepared to leave our successful, secure, and authentic workplace, is that you can't build lasting success on manipulation and betrayal. Genuine achievement requires integrity, transparency, and respect for the people who trust you with their careers and livelihoods. Thomson Marketing Solutions had indeed become everything I had dreamed it could be when I first started the company 12 years earlier. A place where talented people could do meaningful work in an environment that valued their contributions and protected their interests. The crisis that had threatened to destroy that dream had ultimately made it stronger and more authentic than ever before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.